When I worked in TV news early on, I did a morning show, which was incredibly painful from a circadian rhythm standpoint because I had to be in by 3 a.m., had to get up at 1:30 in the morning, and the morning show was like middle of the night show for me, or at least it felt that way. But during those newscasts and any newscast afterwards, I would wear something called an IFB, which is this little earpiece that allowed people in master control to talk to me as I was anchoring. So it might be the director, it might be the producer who would be giving directions, drop page 5, go live to City Hall, whatever it is. So we had a producer on this morning show who would get a little bit impatient and would sometimes give directions through that earpiece that were a little bit over the top. And it was my job to appear calm, cool, and collected as I was receiving these instructions. So it'd be something like this. I'd be interviewing some public figure, and the producer would say, "Shut him up." And so at that point, I would say, "Well, thank you so much, Mr. Mayor. That's all the time we have today. Moving on." And then I'd go on to the next story. And what I realized is that really created the basis for a skill that I teach to my clients now, which I'm going to share with you in today's Speaker Tip Spotlight. So stay tuned. Hi, I'm Karin Reed. I'm a 4-time author, Emmy Award-winning broadcast journalist, and communication expert on helping people to own the room, whether it be a physical one or a virtual one. Welcome to Speaker Dynamics. So that story I just shared with you is actually the basis for one of the things that I think is a critical skill that you can apply in many different scenarios. It's called paraphrase and pivot. So the two different ways that I would apply it today would be if you are, for example, moderating a panel discussion, or if you are presenting up. It also could be applied if you are just running a meeting. So I'll leave it to you to figure out ways that you can apply this skill, but let me explain what it is. And maybe it's best to do it within like a real life scenario. So paraphrase and pivot allows you to basically cut off the monologuer and then move forward with what you wanted to do in that meeting, in that presentation, whatever it is. Let's do it from the standpoint of you're in a meeting and let's say you're presenting up and you have an executive who decides to go in a completely different direction by asking you a question and then giving their take on something that you had not planned to talk about. And they start really, really getting into it and going deeper and deeper and deeper. And if you've ever been in a situation where you're presenting in front of senior leaders, time is short and they are eating up all that precious time on something that they care about, but probably nobody else in the room cares about. So what do you do? Do you just sit there hoping that they'll shut up at some point? Well, you could, but then you get to the end of your time and you haven't accomplished your goal because presumably you're there to deliver a message of value that they can then make a business decision on. So what I would suggest to you is using paraphrase and pivot, which means, okay, so say that this senior leader is talking. As soon as there is just a smidge of air, like they have to at some point take in a breath, I would be cutting in and saying, that is a really excellent point. What I'm hearing you say is that X, Y, Z. And we're actually going to be talking about that in a couple of slides later. So let me continue on. And then at that point, you just continue with the story that you want to tell. Because here's the thing, you can't let them take control of that conversation because you have a job to do and you have to make sure that you get through your message in its entirety. Now, it may not be exactly the way you had planned, but whenever somebody, makes a comment, asks a question that you had not planned on having come into the dialogue whatsoever, you might think, okay, this is the time when I need to just completely stop what I was doing and take a left turn. Instead, what I would consider it to be is a speed bump so that you are able to slow down and let them talk a little bit, but then you're going to continue down the road that you had planned. But you do that by saying, yeah, I hear you. I can understand what you're saying. And that's a really good point. And we're going to get to that, but I'm not going to give you a chance for a follow-up because I'm going to keep moving in the direction that I want to move in. So paraphrase what they just said and then pivot to what you wanted to talk to. That is a great way to be able to kind of exert some control in the room with senior leaders, even if you feel like you don't have much seniority in the room. You're the person who is the lowest on the totem pole. You still have a job to do. You're there for a reason. So the second way that I would apply paraphrase and pivot is if you are moderating a panel discussion. So say that you have like 5 people who are up on stage and you know they all have valid opinions and insights to share, but you also know that there's one person who loves to hear the sound of their own voice. And if you give them the floor, they're just going to walk all over it for as long as they possibly can, unless you do something about it. So that something would be using the paraphrase and pivot technique. So what I would suggest is obviously you want to do some audience analysis, or rather panelist analysis in advance. So find out what the areas of expertise are, the people who are on the panel, find out, what they care about, what they have done in the past, because that is important information to have so that you can make paraphrase and pivot work in a moderation setting. So say that you throw a question out to the person who loves the sound of their own voice and they start talking. And you're like, oh boy, this is good initially, but now you're just getting super long-winded and we only have a certain amount of time for this panel discussion. So at that point, you're waiting for that sip of air that they're going to take at some point, and you hop in and you say, you know what, Bob, that is a great point. I'm so glad that you brought that up. And that actually relates to something that Jane has a lot of experience in. Jane, I would love to get your take on this. And then suddenly you have shown respect for Bob. You have kind of summarized what he said, but you're also looking for a person who it would make sense to then give the speaking baton to, and you let Jane start to offer her insights. So paraphrase and pivot in a moderation setting can be very, very valuable because really your job as a moderator is to make this kind of exciting and dynamic conversation amongst everyone on that panel. It shouldn't just be one person talking 75% of the time and the rest of the group maybe gets like 25% of the time to say a word here and there. No, you want it to be dynamic, and that requires you to be proactive. So it might feel like you are being disrespectful because you're jumping in, but that is not the case. What you're doing is being respectful of your audience, because you want to ensure that they have the benefit of hearing the wisdom of all of the people on the panel, not just that one person. So it really requires you to be very proactive. So paraphrase and pivot is super valuable if you are moderating a discussion, if you are, in a situation where you're presenting up and you've got that one executive who just wants to hijack your presentation and the conversation, you're able to show respect, but then move the conversation forward. You can also use it in any sort of meeting. Say that you're, with your team and you have one person who's definitely an extrovert and likes to talk a lot. If you're able to draw out the opinions of somebody who might be more introverted, you can do that by paraphrasing and pivoting it and proactively asking for them to weigh in. So paraphrase and pivot, that is your speaker tip for this week. Hopefully you can use it. And if you do, let me know how it has worked for you. It worked for me very early on in my broadcast career. I use it on a regular basis now because even when I'm in a workshop, I never know how talkative people are going to be. So I have to be careful that I don't just let the one person or the 2 people or the 3 people out of a group of 20 talk the entire time. I want to be drawing out conversation from everybody. So I use paraphrase and pivot on a regular basis. I know that it works. And I also think you can do it in a way that's not going to feel like you're putting people off. you can do it in a respectful sort of way and generate that conversation, which makes it so delicious for you and for your audience as well. So thank you so much for listening to today's episode. If you would like to learn more about paraphrasing and pivoting, I'm going to put a moderation techniques checklist that is on our bonus content page. So if you want to reach it, you can go to speakerdynamics.com/bonus content. Once again, it's speakerdynamics.com/bonus content. And I have a checklist of moderation best practices for you to take a look at. And Paraphrase and Pivot is on there. So thanks so much, everybody, for listening to this episode. Until next time.